So there was this period of sobriety after that, and Johnny was very committed to being clean and sober, and I thought we had finally done it. We finally did it. We were through it, and we were never going back, meaning he was going to be clean and sober for good this time, and we had a wonderful period of, we felt back in love, or deeper in love than we were before. It seemed things were so good. We were talking about a future again. We were talking about having kids. I mean, when Johnny wasn't using it, was so peaceful. We had a good time together. We went back to Australia like that, in that state, and had a few months. We even had my parents come and visit us in Australia, and we were talking about babies and about buying a farm and, looking for homes in California. And we were in a really beautiful, peaceful period. It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Now, how did you stay at the same place that you did the earlier time in Australia?
We went back to a very remodeled version of that home. Very cleaned up version of that home. Same walls, same structure, but looked a bit different, as you can imagine.
How did you feel going back to that home, given what had happened in early March?
The home isn't the problem. If you're living in domestic violence, you don't just not go home. You don't just not go into the kitchen just because you were slapped in that kitchen. People living in domestic violence live in their homes. That's almost, the home isn't the problem. That's the normal part of your home. And for me, Johnny was my home. Where we were a couple was my home. And that home was often really violent. But it wasn't the structure itself. It was Johnny. And when we went back to Australia, that home, Johnny was in a completely different, he had done a complete 180. Clean, sober, present, calm. We were peaceful. I mean, any of the gripes and the problems that he seemed to have about me went away when he was sober. And so we managed to go back to that same house, but in a very different way. It felt very different.
How do you remember the first act of violence?
Well, you never forget it. That's how I remember it. It changes your life forever. You never forget the first time someone hits you like that. I just had the date wrong.
Okay. And how is it that you think you got the date wrong?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overruled.
I'm embarrassed to say I think I would have liked to have believed that the period of time in which I had to fall in love with Johnny, in which we fell in love, and he was sober, and he wasn't violent to me, lasted for a lot longer than it did. I think I would have liked to have believed that I wasn't hit so early in the relationship and still stayed. He was also sober for a period in 2012, which was a peaceful time for us, in which we fell in love. So I had kind of allowed myself, I guess, to forget that the beginning of that period, 2012, before he got sober, was really violent and chaotic as well. I'm embarrassed to say that.
What did you do to be able to prepare that accounting, that full accounting?
Well, I had the benefit of my therapist.
Objection, hearsay.
So, Your Honor, she's not saying what the therapist said. I'm just asking.
I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I looked at my therapist notes. I had the benefit of those notes, which we had received in February, as well as I reviewed calendars, photos, text messages, my journals, my diaries, of which there were many. I put all of those together. It took a lot of time to be able to, adequately refresh my recollection and fill in the details over the course of the 5 years we were together.
And what did you do when you put that all together?
I kind of filled in and collected all of these various pieces of information and gave a fuller account as best I could for each incidents of violence that I had record of. I think it was called an interrogatory.
In this case?
In this case,
All right.
excuse
Did
me.
you sign that under oath?
I did.
Okay, and it was provided to counsel for Mr. Depp?
It was.
Okay. And was it a pretty lengthy document?
It was far too long.
And how is it that you didn't just remember all of those events like this?
That's not how your memory or my memory works. You know, we were together for 5 years, almost 4.5, and it was a very violent, chaotic, at times very loving, emotional relationship. So as anyone can imagine, there was a lot going on, and unfortunately the violence became almost normal, especially towards the end. It was just, it's hard to say that now, but the violence was almost normal. And, you know, your brain does with trauma what it does, puts it away best you can.
I see somebody who's changing always into different versions of a person that I recognize for a brief moment. And then he slips away. And he disappears. And then I get a different version of him. I get the insecure, scared version of him that lashes out in a different medium every time. So if it's Adderall junkie Johnny, then he's abusive and he's a bully and he's a tyrant and he's mean, he's reactionary and he's incendiary, and anything I do and say is cause for violence or anger. If I speak to him honestly, bluntly from the heart, I'm yelling at him. If I argue back with him, then I'm abusive. If I don't say anything, then I am dismissive or absent or it's wrong here or somewhere else. If I engage with him, I'm part of the problem. I'm yelling, I'm mean. If I don't engage with him, then I'm mean. I'm part of the problem. No matter what I do, I'm f***ed. Because if I look at him the wrong way, he's a problem. If I say the wrong thing, God knows what it is. I'm the problem. I'm the problem. Either way. That's the guy who's on a bunch of f***ing speed.
What did you mean when you were saying that to Mr. Depp?
That no matter, my perception was that no matter what I did, no matter what I did to de-escalate, walk away from him, to confront him, to try to, nothing I did made a difference. Nothing I did changed his rage at me. Nothing I did changed the violence towards me. Nothing I did calmed him down. And I was constantly doing a juggling act of what kind of version of Johnny I was dealing with. There were different versions of him, and they were drastically different from one another. And even more so than them being different from one another, they didn't even sometimes remember what the other version did or said. They acted almost like independent versions of this person, depending on what combination of drugs and alcohol he was on.
Could you please describe for the jury what this picture is?
That is a picture of me a few months, I believe this is April of 2015, so it's a few months after the March incident that happened in Australia, early March, in which Johnny held me down on the countertops and my arms were cut on the glass in that attack.
And if we could draw attention to your arm there, are those scars? What are those? Please describe for the jury what those are.
Those are scars that I obtained while Johnny was strangling me and assaulting me on the countertop in Australia.
Okay. Michelle, can you bring up Defendant's Exhibit 423, please? And does this accurately portray the scene shown?
Yes, that's...
Hold on a second. I'm going to move the admission of Defendant's 423, please.
No objection.
423 in evidence.
Thank you. May we publish? All right, and please describe to the jury what this shows.
It is a picture of me on a red carpet. You can see my scars. Even though I have makeup on them, they're a bit harder to cover because they're rather fresh. I was considering working on a TV series that had James Franco in it. I was asked if I would meet with the people who are making the show.
Objection, hearsay.
It's not offered to prove the truth of the matter, sir.
Overruled.
Thank you.
And so I was considering taking that job. And there was a possibility it would require brief nudity, which I knew I would have to negotiate down. But obviously that was a problem for Johnny. Didn't want me to do that. Didn't want me to work. And frankly, I needed to. And there was another film I had coming out that I had previously shot. It's called London Fields. It was a source of a lot of fighting between us because of the sexuality in the role. It was a constant negotiation between myself and the filmmakers. They made a film, and Johnny told me that he had heard about it, was unhappy with some of what he had heard. He was unhappy with me having done a sex scene in it that he claimed I didn't tell him about. I did not actually film the scene he was speaking of. He demanded that we watch a screener of it, which is a version of the film before it's released. We got one sent to where we were at the time, Johnny's Chateau in France. It's in a remote part of France. And once again, we're in this remote place and we're screening this film that I appeared in, and there was a sex scene in that movie that started before Johnny freaked out because it looked like me. They had used a body double. Unbeknownst to me, without my permission, they used a body double to do a sex scene. So I have an incredibly jealous man who already is upset with me for breaking the rule that I had a sex scene. On top of that, I'm telling him it wasn't me. I didn't shoot that scene. And you can imagine how upset he was. He was irate and was calling me a liar, a whore, among other things. And we had that combined with the fact that I had even entertained doing this job that involved James Franco was a pressure cooker. I called it a week of hell later.
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled.
Johnny at one point slapped me in the face in our bedroom in the chateau that we were staying in. At another moment, he punched me across the jaw. At one point, he kind of either pushed or threw. It's hard to describe to you which of those two it is because I can't tell you. I just know I went flying into this old church furniture. I later thought I had a concussion. It was the first time I thought I had sustained a concussion.